Alright everyone, we have a slew of new updates from North Korea. Actually, things are happening so fast that I'd have to be like awake 24 hours a day in order to report on all of this. First, we have the U.S. ambassador to the UN threatening that we may conduct strikes on North Korea if they conduct an atomic test. It's possible that they will. There was movement at their nuclear testing site a few weeks ago. They probably already have an atomic weapon there. They're probably sort of waiting to see what'll happen. They've conducted an artillery drill now. And I'm not surprised. That, in and of itself, is not particularly abnormal. And what's really abnormal right now is the reaction of China and the United States to North Korea. Under Obama, and indeed, to some degree, even under Bush, we did very little when North Korea conducted an atomic test or a missile test or something, other than slap sanctions on them that were toothless. Now we're actually backing up those sanctions, and China's attitude has changed as well. But now you have Trump. Not only did he just meet with both Japan and China at the same time, again, on this issue, which is not terribly abnormal, but, you know, given the circumstances, I suppose, stands out a bit. Now he's summoning the entire U.S. Senate to a briefing on the topic. I think things are reheating within the Korean Peninsula. There's now enough evidence to suppose that something is going to happen there. What form it will take remains to be seen. North Korea is incapable of surviving in a completely isolated state. It's simply, even the level of tech that they have, which is like 50s and 60s, is incapable of being propped up with a completely isolated economy. They don't have the right resource base to make that work. They don't really have, you know, an oil drilling apparatus. I mean, are they going to go back to using coal steam shovels to extract their rare earth minerals? And if they can't sell them, then what good is it? They would essentially revert to complete peasantry. What little of a market economy supposedly now exists, at least in Pyongyang, would dry up. They wouldn't have the sort of surge of cell phones and maybe some imported foods. They wouldn't have any of that. They'd be living like it was the 1700s, and then their military would begin to dry up. In such a situation, Kim Jong-un, by the way, becomes more dangerous because the regime could destabilize at a moment's notice and preemptive strikes could be launched. It makes more sense to try to intervene early. We probably should have done it back in the 90s, only China stood in the way. Now they're not. So Trump has summoned the Senate to a briefing. He's held high-level meetings with China and Japan at the same time. Try getting the diplomatic heads of Japan and China in the same room, and you're going to spend 2 or 3 hours just with people saying hello and giving one another long lists of honorary titles and telling each other how much they love one another and how they're totally not still enemies or anything like that. He's willing to go through that and go through the rigmarole of summoning the whole Senate and having to talk to them. Talking to the Senate's the most difficult thing in the world to do. You look at the balance of the Senate right now. I wouldn't want to have to talk to the U.S. Senate if everyone was there. It'd be better if it was just an one-party echo chamber at the time with the other party abstaining from bothering to come and air its grievances. Maybe you have one token there. Randall show up at the Democrats meeting to raise hell. Bernie will show up at the Republicans meeting to do the same with Elizabeth Warren in tow or something like that. And that's about the gist of how the Senate operates. I think things, though, are reheating on the Korean Peninsula. I wouldn't be optimistic that the problem just goes away this time, with China sitting this one out. Before it was on the fence. In the past, 90s, 80s era, China was whole hog in support of North Korea. They saw it, I think, as a buffer state while they continued to industrialize. When they began achieving that threshold, they then said, well, it's not quite as important. We'll let the sanctions go through. They'll still be toothless. We'll still largely ignore them. But yeah, we can put a little more pressure. Maybe we can even like put Uncle Jiang in control somehow, and we'll turn them into essentially just a Chinese puppet. They'll have a mixed model. The people there will be better off anyway, and they'll give up this nuclear crap. And that never happened. I think China adopted the same wait-and-see policy that Obama adopted. Only now you have North Korea. They have atomic weapons. They do have long-range missiles, true, the Taepodong 2 missiles, Taepodong. And then they have other Dong missiles, which, I mean, considering how they look, it's just fucking hilarious. Not so hilarious if you get hit by one, but you know what I mean. They look like a giant dick, and they're called a Dong missile. Put 2 and 2 together, why is it funny? everyone wanted to sit around and not get involved because they're like, well, we don't want all that artillery to pound South Korea. We don't want the possibility of them launching an atomic weapon into Japan or China either any more than the Republic of Korea. Why don't we stand back? We put economic pressure on them, they collapse. And it never happened. This was the going strategy for a decade, and it didn't work. If anything, North Korea is no worse off than it was before, with or without China doing its own thing off to the side. And the Chinese now look and they see, well, we're moving towards a consumer economy now. We're exporting our labor now like the West has been for 50 years. We're exporting it to East Africa and some of these other Asian states. We're increasingly going to need to be a post-industrial diplomatic nation. And so, and also use that technological aptitude to build our military, make it strong enough to justify our economic size. So North Korea now is just dead weight for them. They no longer need a buffer. They're entering the world at large, China is, as a major player. They don't need the buffer state. Diplomatically speaking, it holds them back so much that any extra economic productivity from having cheap rare earth minerals or any military capabilities that come from having an easily destabilized true communist state on their doorstep, I think are outweighed by North Korea's constant rhetoric. So the Chinese are pulling back. Trump is getting the Japanese involved, who probably would love to test out their non-passivism doctrine on North Korea anyway. And he's going to lord Japan, I think, over North Korea to get South Korea and possibly China involved. Basically, we can help you. The United States has plenty of firepower. We can take care of the artillery and the air bases. We can sink their ships into the ocean. We'll deal with any fallout from that, literally or figuratively. But the Republic of Korea needs to reunify. China may need to get involved, because otherwise we're going to sit back and let the Japanese take command of the situation. We'll help them. We'll let them help reunify the peninsula. And that would piss off China and the Republic of Korea. The one thing for those that really want to see Kim go, that really works well, is that you have these three powerful nations. South Korea, with the legitimate claim to govern that region of land. Japan, which has scrapped its pacifism, and a surging China, which is now slowing down and increasingly interested in maintaining diplomatic relevance because it knows its economic cooldown has begun. Its military cooldown will begin. It's going to need to transform aspects of its economy to maintain that too. These three different groups can be used to play off against one another to actually get the situation accomplished, to try to reunify the Korean peninsula. The form in which I imagine that will take is the Republic of Korea supplying any ground troops. The U.S. predominantly there to defend the DMZ while they advance into North Korea, possibly supplemented by the Chinese, while the United States pounds their air bases, their navy, and their artillery into nothingness. That's the form I think it's going to take. Trump can then, as I said, he can say, well, the Japanese are rearming, and they already have massive technological aptitude. They just need a few more ships and planes, and they're good to go. So if you wait too long, we may start ignoring China. We'll say, well, we've got to do something. They're approaching multi-stage nuclear weapon. They're approaching the ability to put an atomic weapon on a long-range missile. We're not going to risk it. Other people in the region ultimately have to supply the manpower. We'll supply the air power and the sea power. We'll wipe them off the face of the earth. Kim Jong-un will be dead. And we're going to move in. And if the Republic of Korea and or China aren't willing to do it, maybe the Japanese will be willing to do it because they're getting pissed off at North Korea. Excellent diplomatic tool. Yeah, it would work. By the way, it would be the worst of all possible scenarios if that were to happen. The preferable route is that the U.S. is capable of intervening, and then South Korea reunifies the peninsula. It's the only group of people that would be welcomed with something other than massive panic if they were to show up in the DPRK. The people there have been told for 50 years, 60 years, all these other groups want to eat their babies. It wouldn't be a great idea to have Japanese or U.S. troops in North Korea. China, maybe a little bit less panic, but still would freak people out. South Korea, speaking the same lingo largely, same ethnic background, from the same fucking original culture. No mass panic. largely it would be a liberating force, I think. The only group of people that can do it. It's not like, again, it's not like Syria and Iraq and all these things where a bunch of Americans, a bunch of Westerners show up in the middle of the fucking desert and start fighting. No, this is a bunch of Koreans liberating other Koreans. Totally different scenario. The fact that it would have U.S. and maybe Chinese backing would be irrelevant. We'd be operating primarily from the air if we're smart. But for him to summon the entire Senate is not normal. For him to hold a high-level talk with both Japan and China at the same time is not normal. For the U.S. government to threaten to strike North Korea if they conduct a test is not normal. Before, you had some vague threat issued by the U.S. government. They would say, it would be a red line if North Korea does this. They never talk about what their response will be. And inevitably, it was sanctions after the fact. With both Obama and Bush, they conducted the test. They tested the missile. They fired artillery at some islands. They closed down the, I think it's Kaesong complex, or whatever it happens to be. All those red lines that were crossed, all the diplomatic and military red lines, what was the response? Oh, sanctions. So we're going to keep not buying North Korean goods. We're going to keep putting weight on the other countries to not buy North Korean goods, and China will ignore it. Now China's not ignoring it. Japan is no longer a pacifistic nation. The Republic of Korea is in political turmoil anyway, and the political elite there, by the way, may be willing to reunify the peninsula to buff up their political credentials within the region because of the mass scandal of President Park. And at the same time, you behold, North Korea has fallen further behind in everything except for missiles and atomic weapons. We're now testing the next stage of military technology. They're still stuck in the 1950s. Half of their aircraft can't even get off of the ground reliably. Some of their missiles malfunction and blow up on the launch pads on a regular basis. It wouldn't be simple, but it wouldn't be Desert Storm or something like that. A lot of the enemy would probably flee before us, and once the South Koreans show up, peace could be restored. And that would be the hope. I don't have anything against the North Korean people. For all of these things that are happening right now are not exactly normal. Does this mean that war erupts on the Korean peninsula? No, not necessarily. Even if we conduct a strike on some missile platforms and an atomic test site, it doesn't mean that war erupts. Maybe they just saber rattle some more and they say, oh, this is the last straw, and then they ultimately don't do anything, because that's happened before as well. And that would show, by the way, that Kim Jong-un is more sane than people give him credit for, because he'd be suicidal to actually launch an attack on the DMZ or on our ships if we did conduct a targeted strike on a couple of missile platforms. But if he does, so what? We're going to have to fight them eventually anyway. We don't have a choice. We're going to get backed into a corner at some point where we have no choice but to reunify the peninsula. We might as well not wait until they get a multi-stage nuclear weapon, or even, longer range missiles that are capable of being fitted with atomic weapons. If they attain these things, it becomes much, much harder to actually intervene within the region, and you're going to have to. At some point, the regime will collapse through one act or another. At some point, the Republic of Korea and or Japan may go it alone in the region. We won't have a choice but to back our allies when that happens. Waiting is not a sane solution. We've already tried that. It didn't work. They developed more atomic weapons in that period of time, more missiles in that period of time. They deployed more artillery in that period of time. Yeah, they're using really outdated weapon systems. That doesn't mean that you want them shelling your city. So to defend our allies, because North Korea has violated their sovereign rights on dozens of occasions over the last decade, yeah, we should opt for regime change. A targeted strike, if they respond, then something more vicious than that would have to occur. And it would be sad, there'd be a lot of dead people, but probably quite a few less dead people than if we wait a decade or a decade and a half or something until they have, oh yeah, we've got several hydrogen bombs at this point. Yeah, we're going to drop them on South Korea and Japan because now we can do that because the fucking retarded Americans sat back and did nothing while we openly threatened everybody else in the region. So I think that something is happening there. Yeah, there probably will be strikes of some sort. Then we wait and see. Oh, it'll be the moment the whole world goes silent waiting to see what Kim does. That's about all. Peace out.